Good morning, everyone. Welcome once again to Platte Woods Church. My name is Evie Martin. I'm the lead pastor here. It's great to be with all of you here in this space, and also a special welcome to those of you worshiping with us online today. Do you ever find yourself on autopilot? Maybe you're driving the same route from home to office every day. You don't even have to think about it. Maybe you're walking the same steps past the same lockers from class to class. At school, you could do it with your eyes closed. Maybe you shuffle the same path from sofa to stairs to bed after your daily Netflix fix. You go the same way every time. Your body knows the routine. Your brain doesn't even have to. For example, when I come to work here, I usually go one of two ways, and they both involve 64th Street. Either I cut through on Clam through the neighborhoods, or I go over to Prairie View if I have to, get gas on my way at Hy-Vee or something like that. They're basically the same route, just a minor variance. I don't even think about it anymore. I just go. I could probably get to work with my eyes closed. I don't, but I probably could. Last week, Laz, my younger son, stayed home from school one day with a stomach ache, and I had to bring him to church with me because I had meetings and such. My day had to go on, so I loaded him into the car with his entertainment bag and promised to swing by CVS for some Pepto-Bismol. He was adamant that we get Pepto-Bismol for the stomach situation. He'd asked me like 5 times. I was like, sure, I can be a responsible parent. I can get medicine for my kid. Got this. We started driving, and then I stayed on 64th Street for route variance number 2 to take that slightly longer route past CVS. 8 minutes later, we pulled into the church parking lot. I turned around and looked at him. He looked at me. "Laz!" I exclaimed. "This is not CVS, this is church." I had not stopped at CVS. I just drove right on by. Did not even faze me. My reflexes, my car maybe, knew the way to work, and that is just the way that we went. I was perhaps what we might say, set in my way. And we all get that way. I know I'm not the only one who spaces out like that because the way is so familiar. And I know we don't just do it in our comings and goings. We get set in a lot of ways. The way that we think about things, the way we do certain tasks, the way we function in our relationships. The way that we know gets very familiar. The way we live can get very comfortable. But our New Year's series invites us into stories of people in the Bible who, just like us, have their regular rhythms and their worn everyday paths. They are on autopilot, so to speak, until God speaks into their life. God calls to them with a word, and after that, they go another way. Not a single one of them knows where they are going. God doesn't give a destination or even an ETA. The turn-by-turn instructions are iffy at best. But God calls them to a way of living, no matter what the road ahead brings. And so the hope is that maybe in the words that God has spoken to them, we might hear the words that God is speaking to us, what God is calling us to in 2026. In week 1, just a quick recap, the Magi have their eyes opened as they encounter Jesus in Bethlehem. They leave and they return home another way, giving us our series title, but they also now live able to see God with us and all around us. Abram, last week, was called by God to destination unknown, but with the imperative command to go and to bless whatever and whoever he might encounter along the way. His calling was to be a blessing. And today we'll meet Peter, and Peter is called to fish. Now, there are some of you in the room right now thinking, yes, this is also my call from God. Go fish. Got it. Heard you, Jesus. Thank you. But let's read the story first. This is how the Gospel of Matthew tells it. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18. As Jesus walked along the Galilee Sea, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, throwing fishing nets into the sea because they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I'll show you how to fish for people." Right away, they left their nets and followed him. Peter, aka Simon at this point, is already a fisherman. He knows how to fish. He does it every day. He's in business with his brother and likely another family. James and John are mentioned right after this passage, and they too pack up and follow Jesus. Peter has been fishing probably since he could walk. So a call to fish wouldn't be anything new. But Jesus' call was different. I'll show you how to fish for people. And something in the way he said it, the look in his eye, the sound in his voice, prompted Peter to drop his nets right where they were, turn around from the work he did every single day, and set off after Jesus. To fish for people, whatever the heck that means. Now, fishing on the Sea of Galilee is obviously not fly fishing in the current river. These are two entirely different enterprises, and I don't know of any of you currently involved in the commercial fishing industry, like on the Missouri River or something. Maybe someone is. If so, let me know. I think we're more farming people around here in the Midwest. We like Jesus' sheep and grain analogies more than his fish stories. But I do think it's helpful to understand a little bit of context around the kind of fishing that Peter and Andrew and James and John were doing before they switched to people fishing. Fishing was very much a part of the Galilean economy, as we might imagine. It was a sea, it was a lake. But it was not what we would call a free enterprise system or a creative entrepreneurship. Peter and the others were not fishing to feed their families and sell independently at the local markets for whatever the market rate was. Instead, fish and other commodities were under the control of the elite and for their benefit. There was no such thing as what we know as the middle class. There were the few elites at the top, and then there were the vast masses made up of peasants, artisans, servants, and slaves. At this point in history, Galilee was under the rule of Herod Antipas. They would have been called a king. And he was only in his cushy position thanks to the Roman emperor. So Antipas was obliged to provide not only revenue, not only money into the imperial coffers from the taxes that he collected, but also he had to provide staples such as fish, olive oil, wine. The political and economic system was tightly controlled from the top to ensure that the flow of benefits was always moving upward to the elite and ruling families. So in order to meet these constant and increasing demands, families would often join together to form co-ops. Two brothers, Peter and Andrew, couldn't meet the demands on their own. They likely were joined together with James and John. And this kind of fishing was tiring work. It was oppressive. And they hardly got to enjoy the fruits of their labors. It wasn't like they got to take the best fish home to their families. They were also looked down on by other folks in society. So they likely felt stuck as pawns in the economic and political system of their time. Maybe apathy, resignation had set in. This was simply the way of things in order to survive. What else could they do? It was their autopilot path, the way that they lived every day, sun up to sundown, as their fathers had before them. They didn't know any other way. They probably couldn't have imagined one until Jesus stepped into their path. And Jesus says, I can show you another way. Come and see. So they did. When I think about fishing, which is really my only interaction with fishing, is thinking about it. I have no experience whatsoever with the sport or the livelihood, but I try to imagine what is required to be a good fisherman, fisherwoman, fisher. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that fishing, whether commercial or for leisure, requires above all else paying attention. It seems that fishermen need to be acutely aware of their surroundings, the weather, the temperature, the conditions of the water, river, lake, ocean, whatever it is. They must be mindful of the season. They must have learned over time the behaviors of the fish they are pursuing, where they like to feed and spawn, what they like to eat, what time of day they like to do all these things. A fisherman has to be an observant student of the environment and the ecosystem. A fisherman must lift their eyes and ears out of their own patterns and preferences and creature comforts to learn about the fish's daily rhythms and needs. Fishing requires attention. And so Jesus calls Peter and Andrew and James and John out of one kind of fishing and into another, but the skill set is not all that different. In the years that come next for these disciples, they do follow Jesus, and they learn from him another way to be in the same world that they were in before. The oppressive Roman Empire hadn't changed. The exploitative fishing industry did not miraculously just start benefiting the people. The conditions of poverty and subsistence did not go away. But in the midst of all of those things that they could not change, Jesus showed them something they could. They could change the way they lived with regard to others. Jesus modeled for them exactly what fishing for people looked like. It looked like paying attention, noticing the people that no one else noticed, the sick, the women, the children, the possessed. It looked like seeing past their circumstances and labels and looking with wiser eyes into their hearts, giving the tax collectors a chance, speaking courage into reluctant believers' doubts. It looked like noticing the conditions and environments around them that might cause people to behave a certain way, asking the Pharisees questions instead of feeding them the answers they wanted, restoring outcasts to their communities so that isolation no longer fed their illness. Fishing for people involved curiosity about their condition and empathy for their plight. When Jesus fished for people, he moved toward them. He didn't ignore them. He drew them in with acceptance and love. He didn't chase them away with splashing for attention and self-defending noise. And so Peter, in following Jesus, learns to transcend his circumstances and live an entirely other way in relationship to the people and the world around him. He learns to fish all over again. That's not where Peter's story ends, though. In his 3 years of following Jesus as a disciple, Peter learns what it is to fish for people. But at the end of those 3 years, Jesus is crucified. And then he rises again. And he comes to Peter once again after cooking him fish for breakfast on the lake shore. So the fish in the story has now become the food. The metaphor is shifting here for Jesus. But it's in this moment that Jesus adds to Peter's call. From John chapter 21. When they finished eating, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Jesus asked a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Take care of my sheep." He asked a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was sad that Jesus asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" He replied, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Peter's first call was to fish. Now Jesus calls him to feed. And if fishing for people has shown him how to pay attention, how to draw near to others, how to listen to their hearts, feeding Jesus' sheep is a command to now meet their needs. Take care of them, Jesus says. To feed is to provide for, to sustain, to see to their health, their wholeness, the fullness of their bellies and the fullness of their hearts. 3 times Jesus says it. It offends Peter that he asks 3 times, but he wants to make sure Peter hears. He wants to make sure Peter does not forget. Fish and feed. This is the way. And it is, above all, a way of compassion. In a world where Peter and so many like him were stuck under the thumb of the empire, caught in the machine of industry serving the upper crust, in a reality where the poor had no pathway out of their poverty, it undoubtedly seemed like that was simply the way of the world. I imagine Peter lived day in and day out on autopilot, feeling there wasn't much about the way of the world he could change, and yet Jesus had given him another way. A way that did not require more resources. A way that didn't need permission from any king. A way that wouldn't change the world overnight, but would change his heart in an instant. A way of compassion, of noticing people and responding to their need, does not need any status, any money, no power. A way of compassion is the way of Jesus. But it is not the way of the world. It wasn't then. It isn't now. The world has a tendency toward empire and apathy. The world, especially those who attain power, find it easier and easier to use other people for their own gain. The world finds superiority more compelling than seeing one another's hearts. The world pits people against one another across every line of difference. The world puts up walls to keep us trapped in hate. The world celebrates violence to bring about supposed peace. We know this reality. We are living it. Just as Peter lived it then, so we live it now. And we are tempted by it because it is easier. It is baser. It appeals to our most primitive and apathetic selves. Just within the last 10 days, the deputy chief of staff for the highest office in our land articulated just how he and those around him believe the world works, saying, "We live in a world in which you can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else. But we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time." Maybe that's true. He believes it is. It's a bit dramatic there at the end, I think, from the beginning of time. It's certainly a way of operating in the world, and many choose it. The thing is, too many people, too many followers of Jesus know the secret, that there is another way. Too many disciples chose to feed their neighbors rather than flee from them. Too many early Christians chose to share their resources with those who were enslaved by the wealthy. Too many followers of Jesus cared for the sick, the widow, the orphan, when no one else would. Too many prophets and truth tellers had dreams and spoke equality into the narrative of segregation and racism. Too many people in the pews refuse the cruelty unfolding around us and insist on taking care of our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers who live in fear of a government that has lost sight of the humanity of its people. Too many Peters have said yes when Jesus said, "Follow me, let's go fish and feed." And so can we. In the face of force and violence, greed, apathy, and unchecked cruelty, we could put our heads down and go back to our fishing nets day in and day out, set our autopilot and let what happens happen. Or we can fish for people. We can pay attention. We can notice who is hurting or alone and wonder what they need and draw near to them. And we can feed. We can act with compassion. We don't need any power or permission to do that. We can let our hearts break open for the people that Jesus leads us to. We can heal hurts with our care, and we can stand in the way of those with cruel intentions. It won't change the world overnight. Compassion is not a destination. It is a way. But it will change our hearts. And it will keep us in the way of Jesus, no matter what comes our way in 2026. I'll close with the words of a friend today. She is the pastor of a Lutheran church in the heart of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where she witnesses there on the front lines the chaos being sown by ICE, by the show of force against the community. And she shared this reflection in her weekly public note to her congregation and beyond. I share it with you. Today, standing alongside congregants, neighbors, and friends, as I whistled at an ICE convoy attempting one of the many abductions in my community, I wanted to yell, "It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. Kids don't need to be afraid to go to school. Workers don't need to wonder if it's safe to report. Families don't need to be torn apart, and we don't need to treat vulnerable people with disdain. It doesn't have to be this way. We can choose to say no to chemical irritants used on school property, no to federal authorities stalking businesses, no to snatched parents, and no to cruelty and inhumanity. It doesn't have to be this way. No, it doesn't. Fish and feed, Jesus says to us today. Compassion is another way. May we all be courageous enough to drop our nets and follow. I'll invite you to pray with me, again, a prayer of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's a long prayer, but I think it's important that we offer these words aloud, words that are over 60, 70 years old. May they speak to us still in our words of prayer today. Will you join with me? Most gracious and all-wise God, before whose face the generations rise and fall, thou in whom we live and move and have our being. We'll move to the next slide. We thank thee for all of thy good and gracious gifts, for life and for health, for food and for raiment, for the beauties of nature and human nature. We come before thee, painfully aware of our inadequacies and shortcomings. We realize that we stand surrounded with mountains of love, and we deliberately dwell in the valley of hate. We stand amid the forces of truth and deliberately lie. We are forever offered the high road, and yet we choose to travel the low road. For these sins, O God, forgive. Break the spell of that which blinds our minds. Purify our hearts that we may see thee. O God, in these turbulent days, when fear and doubt are mounting high, give us broad visions, penetrating eyes, and power of endurance. Help us to work with renewed vigor for a warless world, for a better distribution of wealth, and for a brother-sisterhood that transcends race or color. In the name and spirit of Jesus, we pray. Amen.